All right. Good afternoon, 7th hour. You are here. I am not. So that's why I'm recording this video. We'll have to get used to this because I'll be doing this for a couple of days. So first thing that we got to do is our start out. We're not going to do start outs next week, but we are still going to do it today. It is Friday and you got to get your start outs in before Monday, just like normal. But I'm not here to lead it. And to be honest with you, I'm recording this a week in advance and the start out hasn't even been created yet. So what you need to do right now is take about 2 or 3 minutes, go to the on-campus link, you know where it is, right here. Go to on-campus, go to the link, right here, daily thought and verse. It's not that challenging. Here it is, right here. You click on it and make sure that you are looking at the start out for Thursday. If you scroll down, you'll find the daily thought and verse for Thursday. Read it yourself, take a look at it, take about 2 or 3 minutes right now, and go ahead and fill that in. So I guess I'm just gonna ask my substitute today, just go ahead and pause this video for about 2 or 3 minutes and let the students go ahead and type in their final start out for the week. All right. At this point, I'm assuming that you all have that start out completed, and hopefully you even submitted it to on campus already. That would be beautiful. What I'm going to do right now, though, is I'm going to kind of go through what we need to be doing today, which is we're going to be looking at our very first, or we're going to be starting a new presentation. So we're going to be going into, like normal topics. Trying to use my pen here. We're going to go to topics, and the new presentation that we will be looking at is going to be the presentation right here, which will be the Kingdom of the Nile. That is Chapter 2, Section 3. This is going to be our new presentation. So I'm going to be asking all of you to go ahead and make sure your notes you have a new set of notes opened up. You're all ready to go with that. You write them down or type them in, however you're planning to do this. And this would be the name of the notes that you would need to do right here. Once it loads. All right, the Kingdom of the Nile, Chapter 2, Section 3, ladies and gentlemen. Everybody go ahead and type that in. Now, I'm gonna tell you right off the bat right now, it is possible that since I'm recording this video, I might be going a little bit quicker than normal in class, because in class, I'm able to talk with you guys a little bit. We're able to slow down, answer some questions, things like that. So if I do happen to be moving too quickly for you and you need to go back, of course, this video will be up on my YouTube channel, which I told all of you to subscribe to by now, but you can find it pretty easily and you'll be able to check out this video if you need any assistance or need to rewatch anything. All right, so right there is your focus question. How did the Nile influence the rise of the powerful civilization of Egypt? Today, we're going to be looking at the Nile River. It's the main focus of the lesson for today. How is the Nile River critical to the civilization of Egypt even existing? Basically, we're going to discuss today how the Nile River wouldn't even be, or without the Nile River, Egypt wouldn't even be a civilization that we could possibly talk about. So here we go. We're going to talk about this focus question today. Remember, eventually you're looking to try to answer this throughout the presentation that's going to go on the next 2 days. All right, so our objectives that we're going to go through, these are all 4. These are going to be the 4 objectives we'll go through in this whole lesson, but we're only going to focus on the first 2 today. First of all, we're going to understand how geography shapes Egypt. Now, if I was in class, I'd ask you, what's geography? But I know Quincy knows. So Quincy, tell us. Seriously, Quincy, you're not any faster than that. You forgot. I have to rely on other people with more wisdom to be able to tell us what that is. Remember, geography is the land, and graphy is the study of. So it's the study of the land. We're going to find out how land impacts ancient Egypt. And then we're also going to look at the achievements of the Old Kingdom in Egypt. So we're going to be doing the first two today. Of course, you got terms and people. You know how to talk about, you know how to look for those. You know how to fill those in. That's your job. You know that is your job. You're very familiar with that. More terms and people. All right. So Egypt is the gift of the Nile. This was written by a very famous historian that we are going to study later this year, a Greek historian named Herodotus. And Herodotus was a famous historian, and as he was writing about history, and it wasn't quite as ancient for him, he looked at Egypt and he said, you know what? This place, this civilization, which we look up to as being this mighty, successful, impressive civilization, it wouldn't even exist if it wasn't for the Nile River. The Nile River gave us this civilization. It is wholly a gift of the Nile. Ancient people have basically, for thousands and thousands of years, Egypt is one of the most ancient civilizations in the world, probably the second oldest. And this civilization basically lives on this tiny little strip of land next to the Nile River. It's really the only place that's good for living in the area of Egypt. And it happens because the Nile River has these yearly floods and rains that bring this mud, basically. Every year the Nile River would flood and it would leave this mud and silt on the ground. People really had to cooperate though, because the floods were good. Without the floods, they were never going to grow anything and Egypt would never survive. But it was also pretty destructive. So people had to work together. This is a picture of the actual Nile River today. Now, there's been climate change, and it's possible that thousands of years ago, Egypt didn't look quite this bad, but it looks pretty bad. Even back then, Egypt was very desert landscape. And you can see how the Nile River here really at least waters some of the land next to the Nile River. Now, what the ancient Egyptians would do is they would really get involved in building these irrigation ditches down here. And that brought water from the Nile River into their lands and fields and allowed them to be successful and to survive it all. All right. Ancient Egypt was divided geographically into two parts. Now, the first part, you got to watch me on this. So if you're watching the little screen up on top here, you got to watch me. The first part of ancient Egypt is Upper Egypt. Yes, upper. Obviously, Upper Egypt's on the bottom because Upper Egypt is down here. Yes, that's confusing, but I didn't say it wrong. Upper Egypt is at the south or the bottom part of Egypt. Well, then you have Lower Egypt. Now, Lower Egypt is in the north of Egypt. It's actually on top. So lower's on top and upper's on the bottom. Sometimes I get confused when I say this, so I hope I didn't mess up already. But we've got lower and we've got upper. Why? Why would you mix that around? Why would you call that? See, I really wish I could identify who in this class is actually able to educationally figure this out. Why in the world would the ancient Egyptians call this area Lower Egypt and this area Upper Egypt? Why would they mix it around? There must be a logical reason for it. And I'm sure one of you can probably figure it out right now, but unfortunately, I can't ask you that, so I'm going to have to tell you. You see, Upper Egypt had nothing to do whether it was up or down on a map. I mean, the real reason was elevation. Upper Egypt is very mountainous. So literally to get to Upper Egypt, you have to travel uphill. Lower Egypt is right next to the Mediterranean Sea. So the ground was very low, flat, even kind of marshy. And so that would have been going down to Lower Egypt. So it really has nothing to do with directions, but it does make us confused. It does make it a little bit confusing for us to remember. Basically, Lower Egypt was from all the way down here to the Nile Delta. It was The Nile Delta, it was the very lowlands. It was where the Nile River kind of spreads out into all these different parts. That's what a delta is. And Upper Egypt is the place that's a little higher in elevation, and it goes all the way until this first cataract. Now we're going to talk about what a cataract is next. Cataracts are basically rocky rapids. You can almost call a cataract like a waterfall type situation. It might not have been like a massive waterfall like Niagara Falls or something like that, but cataracts are more like areas of the river which you could not take a boat on because it was so rocky and so dangerous, treacherous, white water and up and down. Well, those cataracts, there's a lot of those in the Nile River, and that makes things pretty challenging. Well, did I do this right? Yep. Lower and Upper Egypt were both kind of near the sea. And as you continued up the river, you'd start getting these areas called the cataracts. You can see lines. If you look on the map a little closer, you can see lines. There's the first cataract right here. There's the second cataract right here. And then when you got all the way down to this cataract right here, there's another area, not Egypt, called Nubia. So Nubia is another area that is not part of Egypt. And that was kind of like the border, because the river is where you travel. And if you can't travel on the river because of this cataract, it kind of serves as a natural border between the two areas. Nubia is not a very good area to farm. That's going to come into play later when we talk about Nubia and Egypt's relationship with each other. But in Nubia, it's not good farmland. The Nile River, even though there is still the Nile River there, it's much rockier. The ground and the topography of Nubia is much more mountainous. Not a good place to farm. But Lower Egypt is a great place to farm. And even part of Upper Egypt, you can still do a lot of farming and a lot of growing of crops. The very first Egyptians were nomads, moving from place to place, raising animals like sheep, goats, cattle, camels, things like that. So the very first Egyptians were nomads. But, of course, as scientists will put it, then they learned how to domesticate animals and how to raise crops by farming, agriculture. And this is, of course, a game changer. Two kingdoms were formed in ancient Egypt. Two different kingdoms, basically run by two different leaders. They were Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. These two kingdoms basically were run by families and finally were unified by this man right here. This man's named King Menes, and he was the first king who successfully connected Lower Egypt and Upper Egypt together into one unified Egyptian kingdom. Menes is the guy we give credit for that, and that makes him probably the most and first important king of Egypt. Of course, at this time he's still called king. This happened in 3100 BC. His capital city was Memphis. Yep, just like we have a city in the United States named Memphis, Menes named his capital city of Egypt Memphis. It was very much right in Lower Egypt where the Nile River starts going into the delta. So it was very, very close to the sea where his capital city was located. After Menes, other rulers continued to rule the combined Egyptian kingdom, united Egyptian kingdom. We call this kingdom the Old Kingdom because it's the oldest, 3100 BC. So this is over 5,000 years ago where Egypt finally comes together as a unified group. Later rulers used the Nile as a highway to unite the north and the south. You don't want to travel in Egypt. I mean, it's extremely hard to travel with the desert, the winds that can whip there, the sandstorms. You don't want to be traveling by land in Egypt. The best way to travel is by river. And of course, not just travel, but also trade. Egypt becomes one of the greatest places in the world for trade. they trade products from all over Africa with, if you look at where Egypt is in relationship to the world, Egypt is right on the doorstep of Africa, and the river allows them to connect down to further regions of Africa. It's also really close to Asia, and even has connections close to some of the areas of Europe. So Egypt was a really great place. It was at a crossroads where you could trade and travel with lots of different people. All right, it is important that you know the three kingdoms, so I would definitely write these down. Even though I'm not super concerned with dates, I think it would be useful for you to write these dates down just to get an idea. Today we're talking about the Old Kingdom only. We will talk about the Middle Kingdom next time, but you can see how the dates are a little different there. You might realize that there is a pretty big gap between the Old Kingdom and the Middle Kingdom, and we'll talk about that tomorrow. And then you've got the New Kingdom, okay? In Egypt, power passes from dynasty to dynasty. And what a dynasty is a ruling family. So if I was a pharaoh in Egypt, I was the king. I would pass power on to my oldest son, and he would in turn pass power on to his oldest son, and so on and so forth. And those dynasties could last a really long time, until really the only thing that could destroy your dynasty would, I suppose, either having no children. But even that, you could get around it if you got a cousin or a nephew or a brother to take over the dynasty. The bigger problem was normally if the dynasty was taken over by a rival. So another Egyptian noble or something like that who challenged the authority of the pharaoh and ended up taking him down. And then his family would set up a new dynasty. In Egypt, they called their king, their ruler, a pharaoh. Pharaohs were basically in Egypt in charge of everything. In fact, they were in charge of everything because Egyptians looked at the pharaoh as though he was a god. In Egypt, pharaoh was a god. Literally, when you became pharaoh, you weren't a god before you were pharaoh. When you were a kid growing up and you were going to become the pharaoh, you weren't a god yet. But once you became pharaoh, the gods entered you and you became divine. So really everything you said was true. However, even though you're a god, the Egyptians did expect the pharaoh to act morally or right. If you as pharaoh started acting immorally, started acting against the way that you should act according to the gods, then your authority would come into question and people may try to depose you. Egypt was run by a bureaucracy, which means pharaoh didn't do everything. He knew he couldn't. So he appointed people called viziers. Basically, these are ministers of different departments to be in charge of different things. You can see things like taxes or farming, irrigation, the army. There were different viziers who were in charge of all the different parts of Egypt, which made it very, very organized. And that's what a bureaucracy is. We have a bureaucracy in America. President Biden isn't in charge of everything. He's in charge of certain things. And he appoints people or has other people in charge of different parts of our government. During this Old Kingdom is when the Great Pyramids were built. So the thing that everybody thinks about in Egypt, pyramids, they're built during this time. Here's some pictures of those Great Pyramids. And pyramids were built by pharaohs to protect and be a place for the dead. We'll talk a lot more about that later. The pharaohs, we don't even really know how they were built. We will watch a video on that next week that tries to explain how pyramids may have been built. Unfortunately, even though pharaohs contained tons and tons of treasure and valuable things that would have been amazing to study, all of them were completely robbed and ransacked, probably within 100 to 200 years after they were closed up, because people knew that they were full of valuables. So we don't really have much of that to look at. All right, that's what we're going to call it for today. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at your historical analysis on Hammurabi that you're supposed to look at supposed to work on, and will eventually be due on Tuesday. you go to topics right now, I have included a sheet that will help you to guide you when you're writing your historical analysis. I know we talked about the paper a little bit yesterday, but if you go into this historical analysis expectations sheet, this will really run down the specifics of what your paper must look like if you hope to get a good grade on it. All right, first of all, it does need to have that WLHS format. That is very important. Make sure that it's got your page number, your heading, your page number and heading up here in the corner. It's got your heading over here with your name, teacher, class, and date. Make sure the whole thing's double spaced. It has a title. It's 12-point font. Scroll down a little bit more. This really tells you what should be in each paragraph. And I don't need to read the entire thing. I just want to make sure that you know the introduction, I'm not expecting very much. I'm really expecting 2 sentences. If you want to go more than that, you certainly can. But all I'm really expecting is the analytical question. That analytical question is like, was Hammurabi's code just? That's really the question. So you'd start with that. And then you'd write your thesis statement, which is basically going to state your 3 arguments. It was just because of blank, blank, and blank, or it was not just because of blank, blank, and blank. That's your thesis statement. Then you get into your paragraphs, and you're going to have 3 main paragraphs that are going to go through your 3 main reasons. So you're going to do that. You're going to state your argument in that paragraph 2. State your first argument. It's just because of this. And then you got to prove it. And we all know in history, the way you prove something is using evidence. And we talked about this. You need to use that pieces of evidence that you've documented in your DBQ that we looked at with DBQ Online. So you're going to go into DBQ Online, you're going to find pieces of evidence that can support your argument, and you're going to include at least 2 per paragraph. So you're going to include those pieces of evidence that support your idea. And remember, when you include those pieces of evidence, you need to also explain how that shows your point. You give the piece of evidence, and then you explain how that piece of evidence supports your idea. You're doing that in all 3 of the paragraphs. Finally, we go down to the conclusion paragraph, and it's important to know in that conclusion paragraph, all I am really looking for there is really 1 sentence. You can just restate your thesis again. That's all that's necessary in the conclusion. Of course, if you want to add a little bit more to make your conclusion really pop out, you can, but you don't need to. The last thing that I do want to talk about in here would be the evidence. There is a certain way that we have to cite evidence when we're making our document, and that would be when you include a quote or even a paraphrase of something from a document. So a quote or just something that you noticed from a document. Anytime you include one of those, I have an example here. It's probably a little hard to read because it's small, but you can definitely look on it on your computer because you have access to this very same document. You can see that when you quote or paraphrase something, after the quote or paraphrase, in parentheses, you have to put the name of the document you found it in. So you put parentheses after the quote, and it would say document C. So that's basically what you need to do. What I'm going to have you guys do the rest of class period today is continue to work on this historical analysis. On Monday, you will also be having half of a class period to work on your historical analysis essay, but it will then be due Tuesday next week. So you're going to have the rest of class today to work on your historical analysis essay. I want you working on it. I expect that you are all working on it. And then you're also going to have a similar amount of time, half the class period approximately, to work on your historical analysis on Tuesday. That probably won't be enough time to do it all, but hopefully that gets you a good start on getting that essay done. All right, definitely reach out to me via email if you have any questions, and have a great time working on your historical analysis, everybody.